About to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's be free with Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free.
Good evening, everyone. It's Jim here. Welcome to our latest A-Level Law live revision session. And tonight's topic is an intoxicating mix of law, which is we're going to be guided through by Emily and Liz this week. So good evening, team.
Hi there.
Hiya.
Good to see you. Emily, fresh from your tour de force, your solo effort last week.
Yes.
So welcome back, and great to see Liz again. Quite a tricky topic, I think, tonight. I'll let Liz and Emily guide us through it. So I'll just do the quick intros, which is if you're joining us live, welcome. Please use the live chat window to have a go at the different activities or to ask any questions as we go. Emily and Liz will try to pick up any queries as we go. Lots and lots more students join us on catch up or replay. Watching us on the replay function on YouTube and Tutor2U. So welcome to you. Don't use the live chat because the live chat's not live. But please do stop the video, give yourself a bit more time to have a go at the activities. Shall we make a start? What do we think? Who's leading us off tonight?
Let's do it, yes. We're going to start with an anagrams activity.
Cool.
All right, so the first activity is an anagrams activity. Hopefully you'll find this one nice and straightforward to start us off with. These are going to be anagrams of key terms associated with the defence of intoxication. So when you figure out what the anagram is, just type your answer into the chat. So this is your first one. What do you think that this is an anagram of? It's a key term from the defence of intoxication. And I'm not gonna give any hints just yet. Let's see if anybody gets it. So what could this be an anagram of? Key term within the defence of intoxication. All right, straight away we've got one. Oh, there we go. Two, fantastic. And yes, you are both correct. Well done. And then we've got Hannah as well. Yeah, well done. Voluntary intoxication, fantastic. It's one of the ways, obviously, you can become intoxicated, of course. Brilliant. Let's go for the next one. Again, hopefully you find this one quite straightforward as well. Let's see who can get that as quick. Yes, they are. Who's going to be the fastest for this one though? Yep, well done. Very similar to the first one, obviously. This is the other way, of course, that you can become intoxicated through involuntary intoxication, for instance, becoming spiked, etc. All right, let's move on to the next one. Not as straightforward, but hopefully, again, you get this one. Well, everybody's getting these correct so far. Yeah, brilliant. Has anybody got this one yet, though? Well done, Katerina. Yep, Louis, well done. Hannah, Adam, fantastic. Yeah, it's a basic intent, which is one of the types of offences. And it's important for the defence of intoxication that you understand the difference between basic intent crimes and the other type, which I'm not going to name. Let's move on to the next one. Here we go. This is the other type. So that's your hint. Yes, well done, tutor to you for the previous one. All right, what's this one? We've already had basic intent crimes. What's the other type? Fantastic. Yes, specific intent. Great. So with intoxication, you've got to be able to distinguish between the two types. Fantastic. Everybody's getting their answers in now. You've got to be able to distinguish between specific and basic intent crimes because that determines whether the defendant can use the defence or not. Brilliant. Well done. Right, now that we've covered those anagrams of key terms associated with the defence of intoxication, we're going to look at what needs to be taken into account in order to determine whether the defendant can use the defence or not. So we've looked at two types of intoxication, voluntary and involuntary, and then we've looked at the two types of offences. These are the two things that determine whether the defence is going to be available to the defendant or not. So bearing that in mind for the next activity, all right, this is the information that you're going to need to complete a diagram. So you just need a piece of paper and a pen, all right? Rather than answering this in the chat, all right, because it's a little bit of a different activity, this one. You're going to need a piece of paper and a pen, and I just want you to jot down the diagram or jot down your answers that would go into the diagram, all right? Bearing in mind that information on the screen right now. Feel free to take a photo of it if you think you'll forget it. So the information is, the defence can only be used in cases of specific intent crimes or crimes of basic intent where the defendant was involuntarily intoxicated. So bear that in mind and now try and use that information to fill in the diagram on the next slide. And here's the diagram. So it's partially filled in for you. You need to use the terms on the left-hand side of your screen to fill in the rest of the diagram. And essentially, if you remember that diagram, you can figure out whether a defendant in a scenario is able to use the defence or not. Okay? All right, so for now, just be jotting down your ideas on a piece of paper, all right? No need to type anything in the chat just yet. And you could use this as a revision resource once you've completed it and you know that it's correct. All right, let's see what people thought when in the top left bubble. So what do you think when in the top left bubble? Yep, well done, Adam. Yep, that would be specific intent offences. Yeah, well done, Louis. Fantastic. Therefore, on the right-hand side, we should have basic intent crimes. Brilliant. Now for the next bubbles. So you need to have voluntary or involuntary intoxication in either of those. So which one of those do you think goes in the centre bubble? So the one coming diagonally from basic to defence available. What do you think goes in that central bubble? Involuntary intoxication, Louis says. All right, let's get the answers up. Involuntary, Adam. Okay, fantastic. Well done. So if it's a basic intent crime, the defence can be available if the defendant's involuntarily intoxicated. We're going to talk through how that could be apparent in a second. However, if they're voluntarily intoxicated, the defence isn't available, and that's because of the fact that the Majewski rule applies. The Majewski rule being Becoming voluntarily intoxicated is a reckless course of conduct, and so therefore you've already satisfied the mens rea of any basic intent crime simply by getting voluntarily intoxicated. And that's why if you commit a basic intent crime and you're voluntarily intoxicated, the defence is not available. All right. Just had a question there about how long the session is going to be. This is going to run until 7 o'clock. It's just a 30-minute session. Let's move on. Okay. Bearing in mind what you know about that diagram and the information from it, you're going to complete the equations now. So 4 equations are going to come up on the board. And when I say equations, please don't panic. There is no maths involved. We're doing law, not inferential statistics. So all I need from you is to say whether, according to each of those equations, so to speak, the defence would or wouldn't be available. So let's start with the first one. If the defendant commits a basic intent crime and they are voluntarily intoxicated, would they be able to use the defence? A simple yes or no in the chat, please. So for the first one, if they commit a basic intent crime and they're voluntarily intoxicated, would they be able to use the defence? Okay, Adam's gone with no. Anybody else want to suggest an answer? Wouldn't be available? Okay, both agreeing there. Well done. All right, yes. Yeah, well done, Katerina. Louis says, well done. Yeah, that's true. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Everybody's agreeing. Well done. So let's move on to the next one. If they commit a specific intent crime, such as murder, for instance, and they're voluntarily intoxicated, would the defence be available in this situation? What are we thinking? Yes or no in the chat. Okay, Louis and Adam have gone with yes. Ooh, not total consensus on this one though. Hannah and Sass have said yes as well. Okay. Well done to most of you. Yes, it would be available. Well done. Moving on to the third. If they commit a basic intent crime and they're involuntarily intoxicated, again, would the defence be available to them? So if it's a basic intent crime and they're involuntarily intoxicated, would the defence be available to them? Adam's gone with yes. Hannah's gone with yes. Yeah. Well done. Yes, well done. Good. It would be available. And the last one. If they commit a specific intent crime and they are involuntarily intoxicated, would the defence be available in this situation? Same has gone for yes. Anybody else? Adam's also gone for yes. Yep, seems like there's a consensus on this one too. Yep, well done Louis, well done Katerina, Hannah, fantastic, yep. The defence is usually available. It's only where the defendant commits a basic intent crime and they're voluntarily intoxicated that they can't use it, and that's because of that Majewski rule. The defendant is considered to have been reckless by getting intoxicated, and because recklessness satisfies any basic intent crime, they've already satisfied the mens rea of a basic intent crime. All right. Let's move on to the next one. So we're going to look at 2 different types of offences now, which we've been referring to, specific and basic intent crimes. All right. What you're going to do is read this information and then come up with a list of examples of basic and specific intent crimes in a moment. I'm going to go through what each of them mean though, just in case anybody's not sure first of all. So basic intent crimes are simply ones that can be committed through recklessness. For instance, the mens rea of battery is to intentionally or recklessly apply unlawful force. All right, so you can see the word reckless in there, which means that it's a basic intent crime. A specific intent crime, however, requires intention and wouldn't be satisfied via recklessness. So for instance, the mens rea of murder is the intention to cause death or GBH. In that case, you can't see the phrase or the word recklessness, so that tells you that it wouldn't be satisfied through recklessness, therefore couldn't be a basic intent crime. It's only a specific intent crime. So now that I've given you a couple of examples and I've gone through what the difference is, what you're going to do is give me examples of basic and specific intent crimes. All right, so in the chat, let's start with specific intent crimes. Which offences that you've studied do you think would be classed as specific intent crimes? Think of all of the property offences that you've done, the fatal offences that you've covered, and the non-fatal offences as well. What do we think? And bear in mind, specific intent offences tend to be the more serious ones as well, so that should help you. All right, we've got murder first of all. Yes, well done. GBH, You're right, however, you'd need to be a bit more specific. Yes, well done. Somebody's just said Section 18 GBH. Yeah, well done. Robbery, fantastic. Battery wouldn't be, but that would be a basic intent crime. Theft, robbery, burglary. Yep, well done, Adam and Louis. Fantastic. So, yeah, murder's specific, Hannah. Well done. Burglary, Georgie. Fantastic. All right, brilliant. Let's have a look. Yeah, murder and GBH with intent. Yes, under Section 18. Fantastic. Well done. All right, we're quite good with this. And yes, Millie, well done. Voluntary manslaughter as well. Okay, moving on to basic intent crimes now then. Give me examples of basic intent crimes. What are we thinking? Again, these are usually they're the least serious ones. Manslaughter, again, be a bit more specific because there's 2 types of manslaughter and only one of them would be classed as basic. Yeah, ABH under Section 47 of the Offences Against the Person Act. Brill, yeah, Section 20. Assault and battery, yeah, well done. Assault, yeah, assault, battery, fantastic. Yep. We're all doing really well at this, okay. Brilliant. And involuntary manslaughter, yes, well done, Katerina. Good. So both unlawful act and gross negligence manslaughter. Brilliant. All right, so on the screen there are your specific and your basic intent crimes. It's really important that you know the distinction between those two for this defence. Well done, you did really well there. All right, we're going to look now at the 2 types of intoxication. So what I want you to tell me is how a person could become voluntarily and then involuntarily intoxicated. Let's start with voluntary intoxication. If we could move on to the next slide, thank you. So how could somebody become voluntarily intoxicated? This might sound obvious, but you would have to be aware of this in the exam, so I just want to check that you know. So how could a person become voluntarily intoxicated? I always say to my students, there's really 3 ways that you can become voluntarily intoxicated. If you break it down. Yes, so voluntarily drinking alcohol, good. Yep. Yep. Anything else? Yes, doing drugs, yes, so voluntarily using drugs, good. And then fantastic, Katerina, yeah, using prescribed drugs, brill. With the prescription drugs, what you need to do is make sure that you explain the defendant is aware of the consequence of them, because that's the difference between them being voluntarily and involuntarily intoxicated. Yeah, all of these are good examples. Yeah, brilliant. With knowledge of side effects, Georgie, yeah, well done. Self-injecting, yeah, all of that sort of stuff. Fantastic. All right, how could a person become involuntarily intoxicated then? Again, sounds very straightforward, but you do need to be aware of this for the scenario questions. So how could somebody become involuntarily intoxicated? Bro, yes, that's the first one that comes to people's minds, isn't it? Being spiked. Perfect example. Clearly that was the one at the forefront of everybody's minds there. And brilliant, Georgie. The other example is where you don't know the side effects of a prescription drug, for instance. Like in the case of, oh, actually, I'm not going to say that because that is a case later on. Like in a case that we're going to look at later on. Brilliant, well done. All right, we're doing really well so far. You clearly got a good understanding of this. Right, I'm going to pass over to Liz now to focus on the big reveal. All right, well done so far.
Okay, thank you. So this next activity, if some of you have joined us before, you'll be familiar with it. We're going to have 5 clues come up on the screen. And as the clues come up, you've got to try and guess what is going to be revealed. So if we can move on to the next slide. Okay, so the first clue. The defendant was involuntarily drugged by a friend. Okay, so this is obviously referring to a case. These are case facts, and we've got a really big clue there. So it's involuntary intoxication. So all of intoxication you can basically split into 2. You've got voluntary and involuntary, like Emily has outlined for us. So anybody want to pop any comments in the live chat about what you think it might be if we reveal number 2? So while Dee was intoxicated, his friend encouraged him to perform sexual acts on a 15-year-old boy. So, okay. So someone's popped in the chat, defence is allowed. So just because somebody is involuntarily drugged doesn't automatically mean that the defence is allowed. So involuntary intoxication, surprisingly, does not automatically mean that you've got a defence, which we would presume. If somebody was spiked, you presume that you get a defence, not the case. So a couple of you are along the right lines. If we reveal clue number 3, the defendant's defence was that if he had not been drugged, he would not have committed the crime. So quite a lot of us can kind of get our head around that rationale, the idea of, well, I wouldn't have done it had I not been drugged, and I was drugged and I was spiked and it was involuntary. But actually that doesn't prevent fault at the time in terms of having that intent for the offence. And this particular case has got some kind of facts which make it quite a difficult case. The defendant was convicted of indecent assault. I think we all know where we're going with this one. So well done for those of you who got this. Katerina's put he was known to do those acts and didn't restrain himself. Correct. The court decided that a drunken intent is nevertheless an intent. So a drunken intent, a drugged intent. And if we reveal the answer, quite a few have got it now. Well done. The cases R and Kingston. So R and Kingston is essentially the kind of the one key case that you need to know for involuntary intoxication. And that even if somebody's involuntarily intoxicated by drugs or drink or whatever, if they had the intent at the time, no defence. So involuntary intoxication is kind of like an all or nothing defence. You either have a complete defence if your involuntary intoxication has prevented you from forming the mens rea, or you have no defence if you still had mens rea. So that was a particularly kind of difficult case. And actually the man who drugged him also was convicted, and I think in the end got a higher sentence than Kingston himself. Okay, so well done. Really, really good answers there. So the next one is a 30-second challenge. So you have 30 seconds to answer the question that comes up on the screen. So you just get as many answers in the chat as you can. Doesn't matter if you get them wrong. So if we reveal what we want you to do. So list as many key cases relating to the defence of intoxication as you can. If you can, pop in the name. Also pop in a brief summary of what was held in that case. So off we go. Okay, so I was expecting some music then. Maybe you can hear it and just I can't. So yeah, just pop some names into the chat. If you could put like one sentence on what it's held in that case, that would be absolutely fantastic. Intoxication is a common law defence. So there is a wealth of cases out there, and it's really important to think about, okay, realistically, how many cases do I need to know for the grade that I want to achieve in the exams? Because it's really easy to kind of run away with all of the cases, and actually you can kind of really narrow intoxication down to like 5 key cases as a defence. So we've got some in there: Beard, Majewski, Lippmann, Gallagher. The musician is intoxicated. Oh dear. Yeah, Adam's got loads there. Well done. And if you're sat there thinking, I've never heard of Lippmann, different teachers teach different cases. So it may well be that actually Emily teaches different cases than I teach, and that's absolutely no problem. So if you see a case there and you think, I don't know that one, it's not that something's been missed. It's just that there are a really wide range of cases to go from. So 30 seconds is up. Loads of really good answers. Well done. So on this slide, we've kind of got some really key cases that you need to learn. So Majewski is our authority for it distinguish between what is a basic and a specific intent offence. Majewski is also really, really important because Majewski is our case for voluntary intoxication and basic intent offences. So I always kind of teach intoxication to my students by saying, think about these kind of 4 different panels, like basic intent, specific intent, voluntary intoxication, involuntary intoxication, and think about how they all combine. So voluntary and basic, voluntary specific, involuntary, you just need that one case. So of Kingston. So Majewski is kind of like your voluntary basic case. You've also got the case of Beard, which you can use for kind of voluntary intoxication, specific intent offences, because Beard was a really, really early case in the kind of chronology of intoxication and told us about how you can actually use it to disprove mens rea. Doesn't necessarily mean you're acquitted. Sheehan and Moore, very interesting case. The defendants didn't have the mens rea for murder, but again, it acted as a partial defence. So that's another voluntary intoxication, specific intent offence. Kingston, we've looked at. Allen, so in the case of Allen, somebody knew they were consuming alcohol, but they claimed that their intoxication was involuntary because they didn't know how strong it was, and they told us that's not the case. Gallagher is our Dutch courage case, and then you've also got Hardy and Bailey talking to us about prescribed drugs and whether or not they were known to have intoxicating effects. So super well done, loads of cases there. Okay, if we pop on to the next activity. So we have got a few multiple choice questions here. So just pop a letter in the chat if you think you know the answer. So question number 1, which case made the distinction between basic and specific intent crimes? So A for Kingston, B Majewski, C for Beard, D for Allen. Okay, so super well done. We can reveal the answer is Majewski. Yeah, so Majewski, and obviously you've spoken about this already tonight. Specific intent offences just require intent. Basic intent offences can be satisfied by recklessness. Majewski is also our authority for telling us that voluntary intoxication will never, ever be a defence to a basic intent offence, because becoming intoxicated is a reckless course of conduct. So you satisfy that. There's some really damning quotes in the judgment about becoming so intoxicated. If somebody chooses to become so intoxicated that it prevents them from forming mens rea, for example, they don't know what they're doing, they've still been reckless. That satisfies the reckless element of the offence, even though if you think about it on a kind of a deeper level, that kind of contradicts principles of law generally. So Majewski was a case, I won't go into the facts because they're quite long, Georgie's just asked in the chat, but Majewski is a case where he'd ingested a lot of drugs and alcohol, and there was a fight in a pub. I think he had 3 counts of ABH, 3 counts of ABH on a police officer, all basic intent offences. Tried to claim, I was so intoxicated I didn't know what I was doing. They said it's voluntary. So they said if a man of his own volition induces himself into that state, no harm is done to him by holding him accountable by law. Fantastic. So if we can move on to the next question. What principle was decided in Attorney General for Northern Ireland v Gallagher? So again, just popping in the letters. A drunken intent is nevertheless an intent. B, the defendant is voluntarily intoxicated. You're very welcome, Georgie. Even if he didn't know the strength of the alcohol. C, if the mens rea was formed before the intoxication, as with Dutch courage, there's no defence. And D, intoxication is not a defence to basic intent crimes. So we've got a couple of different answers here, but we can reveal the correct answer is C. So in Attorney General's for Northern Ireland versus Gallagher, this is where the defendant drank for the purpose of committing the crime for Dutch courage, which is kind of a phrase which you might not be familiar with, but the idea of to get a little bit of courage, a little bit of confidence by consuming the alcohol in order to prepare for a particular task. Not recommended. But yeah, so they said actually in these kind of cases, what the lawyers have been quite clever in kind of saying that actually, well, they have the mens rea before, not when they committed the actus rea. So this kind of is along the lines of like coincidence of actus reus and mens rea contemporaneity. But the courts have quite clearly said that if somebody has the intention and they become intoxicated in order to commit the offence, that is not a defence. They've still got actus reus and mens rea. There is no defence there. Voluntary intoxication, they've got intent. So question number 3, if we move on, which case stated that the defendant may use his intoxication as evidence that he did not have the mens rea for the offence? So A, Kingston, B, Beard, C, Majewski, D, Bailey. So again, if you just pop a letter into the chat, if you think you know this one. This one is a slightly older case, so some of you might not be as familiar with it, but definitely worth having a little go. So thank you for answers so far. Okay, we can reveal that the answer is Beard. So Beard is our authority for the fact that actually you can use voluntary intoxication as evidence that you don't have mens rea for a specific intent offence. So we know voluntary intoxication, basic intent offences, no defence. So voluntary intoxication, specific intent offences, you can rely upon your intoxication to say that actually you didn't have the mens rea, but it will never be a complete defence, because by being voluntarily intoxicated, you've demonstrated some fault. Fantastic, well done. So if we move on to question 4, which case stated that a drunken intent is nevertheless an intent? So we've got A, Kingston, B, Majewski, C, Sheehan and Moore, D, Allen. So again, just pop some letters into the chat. I think we've kind of spoken about all of this already. So yeah, everybody is looking along the right lines. Well done. We can reveal the correct answer is A, Kingston. And this kind of quote about a drunken intent is nevertheless an intent. This kind of concept applies to voluntary and involuntary intoxication. It is no defence at all with either type of intoxication at law to say, but I was drunk, or I wouldn't have done it if I was sober, or I was drugged. If you have intent, you have intent. And the courts will find that irrelevant of the state of your intoxication. So one more multiple choice question if we move on. So what is the effect of a successful intoxication defence? So A, D is acquitted, B, D is found guilty, C, D is found not guilty by reason of intoxication, or D is found guilty of a lesser offence. So there's kind of technically two answers that you could have here. So if you get either one of them, that's absolutely fine. So again, just pop your answers into the chat. So if we reveal the answer that we put on here is A, correct. So if any of you put A, but you also could have put D for this answer. So B, obviously, if you're found guilty, that's not been a successful defence. C is incorrect because it's unlike insanity. So insanity, you have the special verdict, not guilty by reason of insanity. You don't have that in intoxication. So a defendant can be acquitted if they are involuntarily intoxicated and it prevented them from forming the intent. A defendant can also be found guilty of a lesser offence. So D is a correct answer if they are voluntarily intoxicated and found guilty and prosecuted for a specific intent offence. If it is found that they are they were prevented from forming the mens rea, they will be found guilty of the lesser relevant basic intent offence. So, for example, if they're being prosecuted for murder, voluntarily intoxicated, so intoxicated they couldn't form the mens rea, they'll then be prosecuted for manslaughter. If they were being prosecuted for Section 18, it'll be reduced to Section 20. The only circumstance where that doesn't apply is if they're being prosecuted for an offence like theft or robbery, which are specific intent offences for which there is no relevant basic intent offence. And in those circumstances, a weird quirk of the law is then they do get completely acquitted. So you've kind of got three options with intoxication. It will either not be successful, it will be a partial defence, or a complete defence. Okay, so we will move on to the next activity. So this is a really good one. So guilty or not guilty is what you have to determine. So we've got the line-up silhouettes there, which I really like. Okay, so if we move on, a 21-year-old university student takes ecstasy after buying it in a club and later steals glasses and toilet paper from the club. So first of all, pop into the chat. Is that voluntary? Is that involuntary intoxication? Do you think that they would be guilty of a crime or not guilty of a crime? Okay, so pop your answers into the chat. Voluntary or involuntary? Will they be found guilty? Will they be found not guilty? We've not got a lot of facts here to go on, but off of our kind of initial analysis. So Adam and Georgie have said voluntary, correct. You know it's voluntary. They've taken ecstasy. The word taken suggests that they're aware they're consuming it. They've purchased it. So yeah, voluntary intoxication. So voluntary intoxication, we've got to think about what offence they are being prosecuted of, and that would be theft and robbery. They're specific intent offences. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, did they have the mens rea or not? If they still had mens rea, then they will get no defence. So if we reveal the answer is not guilty if they were so intoxicated that it actually prevented them from forming the mens rea. That one could kind of be guilty or not guilty, depending upon whether or not they formed the mens rea, whether or not they had mens rea, which isn't kind of, we would need a little bit more detail. But just because they're intoxicated doesn't necessarily mean they're automatically not guilty. Okay, so the next scenario. Danny is spiked with LSD at a party and begins to hallucinate. He sees what he believes are aliens coming to abduct him, so rushes to get away, and in the process knocks Helena over, causing her to sprain her wrist as she falls. So bad night for Helena and Danny. So pop into the chat, voluntary, involuntary, guilty, not guilty. What do we think? Okay, so Jessica, well done. Involuntary, correct. She was spiked. She's not aware that she's consuming LSD. She's not aware that she's consuming that substance. So if someone's involuntarily intoxicated, we worry less. We don't really worry about this distinction of specific or basic intent offences because they've not. The question that we ask is, did they have the mens rea? Elena, no, because he believed that aliens were abducting him. So therefore, the answer is not guilty. He'd have a complete defence. Well done. Really good answers. Okay, so a woman who rarely drinks has 3 glasses of champagne without realising the strength of it. Instantly, your kind of alarm bells should start going, oh, this sounds like Alan. She begins dancing on the table in a bar, and when staff try to get her down, she throws her bag at the waiter, causing a red mark to appear on his face. So, again, pop in the chat. Not guilty. How has she become intoxicated? So Georgie's put involuntary, which is not quite accurate. Strength of it, it's intoxication. She still knows that she's consuming an intoxicating substance. So it's voluntary intoxication. So what we now need to think about, Georgie's put ABH. Potentially, if it's only a red mark, that would probably just be a battery. So a few people have said voluntary, basic intent, guilty. Correct. So the authority she would be guilty. No defence, Majewski. Georgie said, but she didn't know the effects. Really, really good question. Really good point, Georgie. And exactly what the defence lawyer would be saying in court, which she didn't know. If she has voluntarily consumed champagne, which she knows to be an intoxicating, she's aware that she has chosen to consume an intoxicant. Okay, if we move on to the next slide. A woman's drink is spiked. Whilst under the influence of the drug, she starts arguing with her friend and pushes her to the ground. So, voluntary, involuntary, guilty, not guilty. What are we thinking? Pop your answers in the chat. So it is like a process. So Jessica's automatically said not guilty, involuntary. So it's really, 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 really important to remember with intoxication that you don't just presume if they're involuntarily intoxicated, they're not guilty, because we've got to ask ourselves, do they have mens rea or do they not? It's not that simply if it's involuntary intoxication, they're not guilty. So really good points there, really good comments. It is involuntary. While she's under the influence of drugs, she starts arguing with her friend. So it would depend if we think she has got mens rea or not. We would need some more facts. It's a really, really short fictitious scenario, but potentially if it could be proved that she was prevented from forming mens rea, it could be not guilty. But if actually they were arguing and she's done a deliberate act and it's a push, potentially she did still have the mens rea, and therefore she may be guilty. We'd need a few more facts there. Great answers in the chat. Okay, so if we move on. Alice took illegal drugs. While she was under the influence of drugs, witnesses saw her hit Peter in the face with a saucepan, breaking his jaw. Alice so is it specific or basic? So intoxication is really different to other defences. Like insanity, you learn the 3 elements and apply. Self-defence has got 2 aspects and you apply. Whereas intoxication is like a process you've got to work through. You've got to think about, okay, so here, Alice has taken illegal drugs. So that would suggest to us that her intoxication is voluntary. Okay, so voluntary intoxication. Then we've got to think about, is it a basic or a specific intent offence? So she has used a weapon, she's broken his jaw. That's quite serious. It could be prosecuted as Section 18 GBH. It could be prosecuted as Section 20. So if it is just because she can't remember doing it, doesn't automatically mean that she didn't have the mens rea at the time. People can carry out intentional acts when they are intoxicated and not remember them. Just because you don't remember them doesn't mean they didn't intend to do them. The fact that she had no reason to harm Peter may mean that she didn't have mens rea. So the answer could actually be either guilty or not guilty, depending upon what she was prosecuted for. So if she was prosecuted for Section Super, super well done. So I think if we move on, that is the last, a couple of final key points to bear in mind. Intoxication can be voluntary or involuntary, and it's really important to, when you're working through it, think about is it involuntary or voluntary, and has the defendant committed a specific or basic intent offence? Because it is a combination of those two factors that will determine what test you are applying. It must cause a lack of mens rea to be successful. And successful will mean it can either be a complete defence or a partial defence, depending upon the type of intoxication. It can be used in cases of specific intent crimes, but it has got to be proved that they have got no mens rea. And it can be used in cases of basic intent crimes, but only where the defendant was involuntarily intoxicated. Okay, so I think,
Wow.
yeah, that takes us to the end.
Fantastic. What a whistle-stop tour of intoxication. Fantastic. And what do you think to the student responses in the live chat? Amazing.
Fantastic.
Yeah, really good.
We said this last week, didn't we, actually, to be fair, that they were an absolutely on-fire crew. And again, tonight, some familiar faces, but also some new faces, but just amazing stuff. You lot know your law. I wish I could have done better with my efforts, but fantastic. An amazing session. Huge thanks to Emily and Liz for delivering the session, for putting it together, along with all the other sessions that the team, Sarah, Rabina, Dan and the team are putting together for the rest of this term. Don't forget to go to tutortu.net/live and look at the previous sessions. If you've got mocks coming up, maybe some assessments, there are lots of mocks, unfortunately, aren't there, coming up over the next few weeks and months. Make use of those. Go back onto the previous sessions, download the slides, work through the activities. I'm sure you'll find them useful, as well as other subjects as well. Superb stuff. If you enjoyed the session, either live or on demand, give us a thumbs up. We always appreciate that. And we'll look forward to catching you again this time next week. It's a regular slot, Tuesday, 6:30, for some A-level law revision. So spread the word. If you can join us live, that's fantastic. If not, catch us on the replay on YouTube or TutorTube. And we'll see you next week. So thanks very much.
Thank you. Well done, everyone.
Bye.